Well, welcome back to the news today. This is the Daily Debate. Well, according to reports, the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas calls for the complete removal of the blockade on the Gaza Strip. When the fighting began over a month ago, Hamas announced that their main goal was to bring about an end to the siege. Well, on one hand, removing the blockade could be seen as a victory for Hamas. Lifting the siege would ultimately benefit the residents of the Gaza Strip. With me is Dr. Boaz Ganor, founder and executive director of the Institute for Counterterrorism at the IDC in Herzliya. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
And Orit Perlov, Middle East social network expert at the Institute for National Security Studies. Thank you as well for joining us here in this debate. Well,
Thank you.
Today we asked, does the lifting of the blockade hand Hamas a victory, or is this an issue that both sides agree on? Well, for our answers from our viewers, we turn to Ayman Siksik. Hello, Ayman.
Yes, David, good evening. So as you mentioned, today we asked our viewers whether they think lifting the blockade over Gaza would mean victory for Hamas. Now, this has been a central issue in the talks between Israel and Hamas for some time, but more so than ever during the recent conflict. Let's take a look together at the results of our daily poll. So as you can see, David, 77% said yes, this would be a victory for Hamas. Only 21% said no. But we also asked our viewers to weigh in on the issue with comments. Let's review what they had to tell us today. David Turner from the US tells us, lifting any restriction is a victory for Hamas and a future danger for Israel, a comment that coincides with the results of our poll today. Up next, Marsha Green tells us, well, with rockets flying out of Gaza, not the time for the debate. Marsha is, of course, referring to the breach of the ceasefire by Hamas earlier today, just hours before it was scheduled to end. However, Shadi, who writes to us from Jerusalem, sees things differently and states that the Israeli blockade should definitely be lifted. Shadi responded on our Arabic channel. Up next, Michel Levy from France tells us yes and no. What matters is peace and calm for Gazans. Allowing them to better their lives by lifting the blockade will be good for Israel. A more complex view there, as you can see, David, and an attempt to consider Israel's long-term interests in this conflict. Overall, it's safe to say that in light of today's news, the question of the blockade has become more controversial than ever, David. Bringing the discussion back to you.
Well, thank you, Ayman Siksik, for that very interesting topic for us here today, and certainly relevant to what's happening here. Dr. Ganor, first of all, the stated position, stated reason for the siege, and the somewhat obvious one, is to clamp down on Hamas's ability to wage terror against Israelis. That's the straightforward purpose of this siege, to control what comes in and out, including people. Do you believe that it's been effective, given what we've seen in this current conflict now? Has that siege actually achieved its intended purposes?
Well, first of all, let me argue that maybe the term a siege or a blockade is not really accurate in order to describe what is happening in Gaza in the last few years. If we go back in history a little bit, we remember that in 2006, Hamas took over Gaza by force, killing many Palestinians while doing that, killing Fatah members and so on and so forth. And Israel have sealed the ground border between Israel and Gaza, and also the sea as well. Still, of course, they have the border with Egypt, but Egypt decided to do the same thing. So if there is a blockade, it's not an Israeli blockade, it's a joint blockade between Israel and Egypt. So this is the first fact we need to remember. Second, what is the nature of the blockade? Because when you're saying blockade or a siege, your viewers probably think about those people which are constructed in Gaza, being surrounded, and they cannot get the humanitarian
like,
things.
Say, what the Syrian army has waged on Aleppo recently, what they themselves labeled as a starve or surrender siege.
Which
certainly
is
a different
exactly different category. What we had and what we still have is a military siege. In order to see to it that the Hamas will not be able to bring into Gaza military weapons, ammunition, and so on and so forth that will be used against Israel, as we see right now as we speak. But humanitarian goods, any other part of goods are getting and was being brought to Gaza on a regular basis. So this is not a siege, this is a military blockade on Gaza, which Israel has all the right by all international humanitarian laws and laws of war to conduct when Gaza is being served as a platform in order to attack Israel. I would say, as an Israeli, that what we see every day in the last months, and as we speak when Hamas broke the ceasefire, is actually strengthening the claim of Israel that such a siege, military siege, not only should stay, also it should be even tightened. And you have questioned, was it effective? The answer is what would have been without the siege. Right now, they have a limited capability that they use against Israel, but if there wasn't a siege, a military siege...
The question is, who knows what they could achieve?
Quite clear. I mean, they have...
Take this to a slightly different direction here. Talk less about the military aspect of the siege, but the effect that it's had, truly, on the people in the Gaza Strip. Now, throughout this conflict and leading up to it, certainly for years now, there's been no mystery about how the people in Gaza, per se, feel about this siege, about the difficulties imposed on their lives. Have you, in your studies of social media now, and seeing what the people in Gaza are saying, and if we can accurately read what the people of Gaza actually are saying, how are they looking at this? As just a purely oppressive maneuver? Do they even see our side, the Israeli side, I should say, of that conflict, of the reason for the siege? Is that even in their calculation, or is it to them just oppressive?
No, it's okay. I'll divide the answer for two. One, just a little bit of background. How did they talk about the siege before the operation? And we need to know what are the effect of the population before it even started the operation. So we are not in the pictures. They see Gaza today, as they call it, the ghetto, the ghetto Gaza, or the prison Gaza, the prison of Gaza. They always, when we tell them to go out of the house, and when we're bombing, and when we give the notice, the 5 minutes notice, and so on, they tell me, there's no way to go. If you know Gaza, there's no open spaces, there's no public places. So it's for us, you lock the doors and you tell us to run. So where to? I mean, there's fire everywhere. The wind's going each direction and there's nowhere to run. So for their direction, and we know it even before, no electricity. Before the operation, there were only 8 hours a day for electricity. Water, clean water was only 5 in every 5 days. One day they got water. Banks, we know, because of the domestic debate between Fatah and Hamas. A week before it even started, there was no money in the banks, no salaries for the last 7 months. So the situation in Gaza was very difficult before it even started. Another thing that we know about the tunnels, that the tunnels is not only for the weapons, but also for business. And if you ask, if we want to know a little bit of how they see what's Hamas doing, they have a lot of critiques about Hamas, but it's more about the corruption, because on the underground city that Hamas created, there's a lot of business, and the money get through those tunnels going for very few hands, and they know about it. And
is this a changing tone within Palestinian society where years ago, prior to Hamas taking control, the Fatah was looked at as the corrupt party and somewhat brought popularity towards Hamas, who was seen as not corrupt? But has that shifted today, in your opinion? Do you think that Palestinians are starting to look at Hamas?
The popularity of Hamas is decreasing, and whoever say that because of the operation we see some increase of the popularity, this is completely untrue. But we need to understand it, and we need to say, they're always asking me the following question. A month ago, 2 things happened. One, we said 3 no. No to the government of Israel, no to Abbas as a partner, no to the Palestinian reconciliation, and no to negotiation with Hamas. A month later, 3,488 rockets and tunnels, and yes to Abbas as a partner, but in Gaza. Yes to reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah, and yes to they tell me there are more hours of negotiation between Israel and Hamas than Israel and Abbas. So that's one question they do ask. I mean, we are rational, so if we get more by rockets, what we're supposed to learn from it. The other part of it, and we need to understand, there were 9 months of negotiation before they got nothing from negotiation. A month of rockets, and they're going to get the opening of the border, we're going to get the breakdown of the siege, and we may be going to see the releasing of prisoners or shifting. So it's not that they're supporting Hamas, and it's not that they're supporting Abbas.
What can Israel do, in other words, in this position to make this less of a victory for Hamas and more of a move from the Israeli side? Is there something that you've seen? Is there an opening for that to even take place?
I'll tell you what is the big loss, and that's maybe they're going to get the opening of the siege, but they lost completely the street, and maybe this is the equation. We saw Hamas, and it's not only during the operation; it was very loud during the operation, but before that, every time they try to create. We always talked about a third intifada, if it's possible. And every time they try to mobilize the masses in the West Bank, in Jordan these days, even in Gaza, nobody's going to the street. They don't have the numbers. And sometimes, even when Fatah supported those demonstrations, we saw on 23rd of July, the big demonstration from Ramallah to Kalandia. They promised 48,000 people march. It was 10,000 march. And not because people tried to prevent it, because there's not enough numbers. So they didn't succeed in Jordan, they didn't succeed in the West Bank, and they didn't succeed to mobilize the masses in Gaza.
So they turned to arms.
Opening, breaking the siege, but losing the street. So maybe one thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Two things, actually, from Orit perspective. First of all, we were talking about the popularity of Hamas. Excuse me, what popularity? What are we talking about? We are not talking about a Western leader that we can have a public poll and ask, do you support them or not? If you would not support them, if you will express your disappointment from this regime, you will be either beheaded like Daesh, the ISIS in Iraq is doing, or you will be executed.
Are we seeing on social media people expressing their outrage?
I'll say two things. One, I absolutely agree with Boaz regarding when they see what's happening around us in the last 3.5 years, and we see Libya and we see Syria and Iraq and so on, the leaders in this region have a tendency to shoot the people. So they know it. After two intifada and so on, the street exhausted itself also, because they said the day after, if we won't succeed, we are staying with them. There's no alternative. One thing that we saw, and not only in Gaza, the fact that it's either us or chaos is frightening everyone, right. Government and public, but because we have the social network today, almost 1 million Palestinians are actively using those tools. And we did, not now during the war, but before that, there's a lot of dismay. I mean, it was the volume, regarding, but more about the corruption.
Comment with your permission. It's in reference to the distress in Gaza even prior to this operation. The distress is there, is no doubt. But if Hamas would not spend hundreds of millions of dollars on underground tunnels, attack tunnels and defensive tunnels, on their industry of rockets, then there will not be any distress, because there was a lot of money to spend on the welfare on their own people. So the distress is not necessarily Israel to blame.
This is what the Hamas administration has invested all the resources in, this fight against Israel. What about the concept, or what do you think of the concept of an easing of the blockade and restrictions in certain ways that perhaps don't threaten Israel per se? There's been a lot of economic sanctions put on the place. People there don't have the ability to run their own businesses, to export things. What about enhancing the export market?
I would argue that it's Israeli interest to ease anything that has to do with economical constraints and let free goods that doesn't have any military capabilities or military involvement. But we need to bear in mind that sometimes things that seems neutral are being turned into military activity of Hamas. For example, cement. Exactly. If you take, now we are probably going to see a lot of cement being brought to Gaza in order to repair the houses and rebuild the houses and so on and so forth. But we saw what they did with, again, hundreds of thousands of kilograms of cement.
Certainly the imports are controversial and dangerous, but we know hundreds of trucks a day are going into the Gaza Strip with goods, with materials. It's been reported that under 10 trucks a day exit the Gaza Strip with exports, with produce, with anything. So in other words, these people aren't contributing to the world. They don't have the prospect for business. Do you think that enhancing simply the export market, as I put out here now, that's a way that, one step that doesn't threaten Israel per se, but that can enhance the lives of people there? Is there a way to do this constructively without just handing Hamas a victory, in your opinion?
I'm not sure. I'm not into the, the zero-sum game kind of argument now. It's either we lost, they won. As Boaz said, I think it will be I think it's our interest to create a better alternative in Gaza for them to lose more credibility and popularity, probably. I would say that it will have to be combined with an Israeli bilateral, probably Israeli-Egyptian agreement to block other weapons and stuff to smuggle into Gaza, and probably international and regional support to do the same. Alone, Israel, Gaza, I can't believe that it will be able to produce such a thing.
Well, thank you both for the contribution to our debate on this topic here today. Orit Perlov and Dr. Boaz Ganor, thank you both for being here again and for contributing. And don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with One on One.